Welcome back to Is It Really a Great Idea podcast. This is the second episode, but the first one in which I'm actually going to start covering things that are in the book, and I'm going to go chapter by chapter. So today I'm going to start with the introduction chapter. So I'll tell you why so many startups fail. I'll give you some of the statistics of how many startups fail, and that might scare you a little. I'll talk about why loving your idea too early is actually the reason why it can kill it. And how did we get to this point? Why is it that founders typically skip thinking and they just rush into building? I'll share a few stories from teaching this in class because remember that this podcast, this book started with a class that I developed for SMU and have been teaching over the past 7 years. And now I'm teaching it 5 times a year and possibly more in the near future. So I'll show you how predictable those failures are if you're just willing to look. So let's get started right after this. Welcome to Is It Really a Great Idea? I'm Yoram Solomon, entrepreneur, author, and professor of entrepreneurship in one of the top US MBA programs. This podcast is based on my textbook by the same name. But I didn't write it to inspire you to chase your dreams. I wrote it to help you kill bad ideas fast so you can get to the one that's actually worth your time, your energy, your money, and your obsession. Most entrepreneurs fall in love with their idea too early. I want to help you fall in love with the truth. Because before you build a business, pitch investors, or write a single line of code, you have to ask yourself, is it really a great idea? I have to read to you the first sentence in the book after the acknowledgement chapter. The introduction is actually called The Big Lie. And the subtitle in this section is called Great Idea. Here is the line. I can't think of 2 words that launched more failed businesses than these 2. Great idea. You know, I can't even begin to tell you how many times I saw an idea that was a bad idea. And what I hear is people saying, it's a great idea, whether it's a presentation in a business plan competition, a presentation to an investor group and all. And they go, it's a great idea when you actually know that it's not. Why do we do that? And it bothers me and it probably justifies why I got the second tattoo on my right arm, which says no BS. Because that's total BS. When we say something is a great idea when it's not, that's a problem. We are sending an entrepreneur down a path that would fail. Why do we do that? Because we don't want to hurt anyone's feelings. This is what it's all about today. It's about not hurting anyone's feelings. But we're not helping them. We're just kicking the can down the road. That's what we do. We're making it somebody else's problem to help them solve the problem. We tell them what we think they want to hear and not what they need to hear. That's not being kind. That's avoidance. And, you know, if you think about that, the reasons we do that, I mean, just think about it from the entrepreneur's perspective. Let's say that we know that what they presented is not a great idea, but they don't know that. We are just leading them down a path to failure. We're just making sure that the failure doesn't happen on our shift. That's not fair to them. The second part is, let's say that they do know that it's not a great idea, and they hear us say that it's a great idea. They can think one of 2 things. One is that we're lying to them. That's not great. Or 2, that we're too incompetent to know that this is not a great idea. That's not great either. So we have to be very careful with those phrases. And I tell my students that in my class that's called Evaluating Entrepreneurial Opportunities, I tell them from the beginning, in the first 10 minutes of the first week, I tell them that it's going to be an order of magnitude easier to get an A in my class than to get me to say that they have a great idea if I don't think that they do. And frankly, the probability of having a great idea is very low. But I'll talk about that. Jeff Bezos, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, can we agree that they built huge companies, very successful? Those are people who often use the phrase, "This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard." And, obviously we're going to criticize them. The HR department is going to cringe. But you know what? They're doing the right thing. If it's not a good idea, just say that it's not a good idea. I can spill over to my other topic, to my other podcast, The Trust Show, and say that we're actually building trust by being honest and being direct without hurting anyone's feeling. You don't have to hurt anyone's feeling. Okay, so we've established that I wrote this book to be very direct and help, not hurt. This is not about hurting your feelings. This is about helping you. And so you're not going to hear me say a great idea unless I really do think that it's a great idea. And I'm very careful before I say that because I don't want you to spend your time and your money. By the way, I'm not 100% correct all the time in assessing whether an idea is good or bad. The actual assessment takes time and effort, and this is what this book is about, is to take you through that assessment, to have you do the assessment, not somebody else. I often get requests from my students to have a 1-hour call to talk about their idea so that I'll tell them if it's good or bad. It's going to take way more than 1 hour for anyone to be able to tell you if it's a good or bad idea. And frankly, I would rather you do it than anybody else. You have the most to gain and the most to lose. So, there are a lot of false positives and false negatives. I remember back in 2014, one of my students in another university, he won the business plan competition and a $5,000 prize. Then he went to win other business plan competitions. He described his product to me, and I explained to him that I don't think that the value to price ratio of his new product will justify success of this business. But, he didn't listen. My feedback did not stop him. He actually applied to Shark Tank and was accepted. And he presented, and he actually got an investment, a $350,000 investment from Mark Cuban. And so he came back to me and he said, you see, this was a good idea. Because obviously, if Mark Cuban says it's a good idea, then it must be a good idea. And you know what? It failed. And it failed for exactly the same reason that I described it in the beginning when he asked me. Mark Cuban is not 100% right. Let's put it the flip side. In 2013, there was another entrepreneur that presented his company in Shark Tank, and they all passed on that investment. And, I remember Kevin O'Leary, his last final words, "You're dead to me." So he said, "You're dead to me." And they all passed on an investment in a company called Doorbot, which you probably know more as Ring, that was acquired by Amazon for more than $1 billion. And you know what? They still refer to that blunder as probably the biggest miss in the show's history. So now nobody is 100% correct. Nobody is 100% right. And, I started my first company back in, 1995? And I failed. It was in the area of internet telephony, and I'm not going to go into too much detail. Not here. I'll probably do that in a later episode and tell you why exactly did it fail, what were my wrong assumptions. Now, I'll go through it as I talk more about the process of evaluating it. And I failed. And then I moved to Silicon Valley, and I joined a tiny little company and turned them around. They had a spread spectrum technology capabilities, and I focused on two industry standards that were being developed. One of them is called the IEEE 802.11b. Do you know what IEEE 802.11b is? You probably don't, but since then we have changed the name or created a more commercial name, which you might be familiar with. It's called Wi-Fi. The other standard was Bluetooth, and we made an investment and sold that company for a very successful acquisition. Throughout the years, by the way, I became one of the first founders of the North Texas Angel Network. In fact, Mike Bartlett and myself, both ex-TIers, I was actually still at TI, we gave the first 2 checks to Chuck McCoy, who became the executive director, to start the North Texas Angel Network. I was an evaluator for the NTXRCIC, the North Texas Regional Center for Innovation and Commercialization, that was granting the governor's Emerging Technologies Fund, the Texas Emerging Technologies Fund, to startups. So I evaluated startups in many, many, many years. I can't tell you that I'm going to be 100% correct. I'm not. I don't pretend to be. But you know what's interesting? What's interesting is to know what are the actual odds of success. You know, we look at Mark Zuckerberg, who started Facebook in his dorm room. We look at Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak, who started Apple in a garage, literally in a garage. HP was founded in the garage. That's actually where the original starting in a garage started. We look at them and we are biased towards those successes, or how I like to call them, the survivors, and we don't really focus on the failures, which, by the way, is why I ask my students for the first, in the first class, the first week of class, their first assignment is to look at a startup failure, a major, very public startup failure, and analyze it. Because we typically don't look at those analyses. And oh, by the way, I prevent them from doing WeWork and Theranos, because apparently everybody just jumps on this, and I want them to look deeper into different companies. Well, here are the statistics. Here are your odds. First of all, most startups fail, period. Not all, not many, most of them fail. It depends on what you read, but it's between 70 to 90% failure rate. Okay? It gets even worse because, you know, at some point, if you're building a significant company, a serious company, you're going to need venture capital funding. Did you know that of all the startups that try to get VC funding, only 0.05% actually get it? That's 1 in 2,000 startups that apply for VC funding. And let's assume that they need VC funding to survive. Only 1 in 2,000 would actually get it. So you're probably thinking the VC experts are probably right, very close to 100% of the time, because of their very, very high ratio between applications to actual grants. Well, of those 0.05%, 75% still fail. VC experts are still wrong 75% of the time, which means that 1 in 8,000 startups that apply to VC funding actually will make it. Why? You know what the number one reason is? CB Insights did research. They do a lot of research on startups and entrepreneurship and VCs. Number one reason startups fail: no market need. You solve the problem that nobody cares about. Then you have running out of cash. It's not the right team. You get outcompeted, pricing call. And a lot of them, by the way, are things that you could have predicted at the beginning. And so one of the things that I ask my students in class is, look, here's an idea. Here's a startup idea that failed. Analyze it. But then I ask them in class, if you didn't know that they failed, if I presented this idea to you right now, is it a good idea? And they think about it, you know, trying to ignore the fact that it failed. Yeah, it sounds like a good idea. Now let me ask you a second question. The reason it failed, was it a reason that you could have predicted before launching this? And the answer is still yes. So we just skip that part. Why do we do it? Because founders fall in love with their ideas. The no market need is because I'm so in love with my idea that I completely ignore the fact that the market really needs it. And the market doesn't. So those mistakes happen because falling in love with your idea make you blind. You suffer from confirmation bias. You only look for evidence that would support why this is a good idea, and you ignore anything that says why it's not. You ask the wrong people and you ask them the wrong questions. You double down on bad assumptions and you throw good money after bad. You can't afford to fall in love with your idea. One of my other pet peeves is when people talk about the most important things for you to be successful is the team. A good team will be successful. Or you can't be successful without good execution or without funding or marketing. Those are the most important things. Well, those things really matter. Those things are very important. You have to have a good team. But even the best team in the world will not sell something that nobody wants. You have to have great execution, but even the best execution will not fix a product that the market doesn't care about. You have to have great funding to support you, but if you have the wrong product, it will support you all the way to the crash site, to the failure. The best marketing will not sell a product that the market doesn't need. So you can read a lot of books and take a lot of classes that will tell you how important the team is, how important execution is, how important funding is, or how important marketing is. And I'm here to say one thing. None of those matter if you have a bad idea. Period. So, you know what? Let's just assume that the failure rate is the success rate is 1 in 100. It's actually less than that probably, but let's say that it's 1 in 100. How good do you think you are in spotting that one? Well, you're not great. I can tell you, I'm not going to be great in detecting this one. But I'll tell you something. The purpose of this book and my class is not to tell you that this one idea that you have is good. It's to tell you why it's bad. It's to find bad ideas, to identify bad ideas, to give you all the tools to find that you have a bad idea. The question that I'm answering is not, is this a good idea, but really, what's wrong with this idea? Because here's how this works. Let's say, again, hypothetically, that your probability of success is 1 in 100. 1 in 100 ideas. By the way, there was a study done back in the 90s. I couldn't find a newer study than that analyzed and reached a conclusion that for one market success, there were 3,000 ideas. 3,000 ideas lead to one of them being a market success. But I'm not going to go into that. Let's assume that it's 1 in 100. Okay? 1 in 100. Let's say that I helped you eliminate 75% of the bad ideas. If I helped you eliminate 75% of the bad ideas, that means that your probability of success just went from 1 in 100 to 1 in 25. Now your probability of success is not 1%, it's 4%. What if I helped you eliminate 95% of those ideas? Now the probability of success is 90% would be 1 in 10, 95% would be 1 in 5. I can help you improve the odds with the tools that I incorporated in that book. But why is this all happening? Why do we fall in love so quickly? Or why do we launch products or companies without really doing a thorough analysis? So here's my theory. And I think that you'll agree with me. We have a pendulum. In the past, developing a prototype took as long, as hard, and as much money as building the final product. So you actually had one chance to build a final product, and that's the first time that you could test it. There was no prototyping, really. This is when we use the phrase, Measure twice, cut once, right? So you measure and you measure and you measure and you measure, you analyze, sometimes leading to analysis paralysis, if you heard that phrase. And it was expensive. It took a long time, took a long effort. You get the product out. You better be right with that product. And many times you weren't, but let's say that you at least analyzed enough or analyze more than you do today. So why don't startup founders analyze enough today? One reason is, again, because we are so easy and so quick in saying, great idea, thinking internally, well, that's stupid, but, I don't want to be the one saying it. I'll tell you up front, I'm going to be the one saying it. That's a stupid. I may not use the word stupid idea. I may just tell you why I don't think that it's a good idea, but I will. I will never tell you ever that you have a great idea if I don't think that it is. And you know what? Just in case you think that I will never say that you have a great idea, I have. I said that in the past. I was presented with ideas by students, former students, people who were not even my students, but heard about me and reached out to me and had a great idea. And I told them, I think it's a great idea. And I did some analysis, but with the caveat, with the disclaimer that I haven't done all the research. That's why I wrote this book, to give you the tools to do the actual research. So we started when the pendulum was in the measure twice, cut once. So we were analyzing, sometimes overanalyzing, unfortunately, often analyzing without actual market data, without the ability to actually use a prototype. But prototyping became easy. You have AI. You don't need to write code. You have 3D printing. You have all kinds of evaluation systems. In the semiconductor industry, you have what's called an FPGA that you can program as if this is the final product chip. You have all kinds of simulation tools and how to simulate a website or an app. It's easy to prototype. And what happened was we got to, let's just prototype, throw it at the wall, and let's see if it sticks. Well, yes, it's fast. Yes, it's cheaper, but it's still taking time, and it's still taking money, and it's still taking effort. I want you to do it in a smart way. I don't want you to just throw things at the wall. I want you to do some analysis. And yes, the analysis does include a prototype. And yes, the analysis does include embedding yourself in the market that you want to sell into. But don't just jump. The pendulum has swung all the way to the other side where we just throw things. We don't think twice. I think, and this is why I wrote this book, it's to bring you to the middle ground. Don't go into analysis paralysis, but don't just throw an idea at the wall without thinking about it, without testing it a little. And speaking of testing, the book really, the framework in this book is around 6 tests. And the 6 tests are in 6 chapters. Chapters 1, 2A, 2B, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, I said 2A, 2B, and you now want to know, what do I mean by 2A, 2B? Why do I have 2A, 2B? So here's an interesting thing, which I think I mentioned last week, and I'll probably mention again once I get to chapters 2A and 2B in this podcast. What would you rather do? Sell a painkiller or a vitamin? I remember when Simon Mack was teaching this class for a period, I once attended it. He changed it since I started it, but then I changed it again and again changed it based now on this book. But he asked the question, do you want to build a painkiller or are you building a painkiller or a vitamin? And the whole idea is a painkiller addresses a pain you feel right now, whereas a vitamin addresses something or prevents something that you might feel in the future. And the answer, obviously, is I want to build a painkiller. Well, I extended this to ask the question in 3 parts. Are you making a painkiller, a vitamin, or candy? So a painkiller solves a problem that you currently have, a pain that you currently have. A vitamin prevents a pain from the future. Candy is not about pain. It might cause pain, but it's not about pain. It's about pleasure. And I was thinking about that going, well, the standard way, the classical way to think about it is you want to make a painkiller. You don't want to make a vitamin, and definitely not candy. But you know what? Let's leave the analogy and actually go to the actual market. Did you know that we sell more candy than we sell painkillers? Yeah. So there is value in that. And so I was probably more than halfway through the book when I realized that I do not want to discount selling candy. TikTok. And I have a list. When I get to chapter 2B, I'll talk about a list of things where very successful companies, take Facebook. Okay? Can we agree that Facebook is successful? What pain does it solve? It doesn't solve a pain. It brings a certain pleasure, a certain gain. So I actually created 2 chapters under test number 2, and that is 1 chapter for pain and 1 chapter for gain, because you need to evaluate them a little differently. So I created 6 tests with the appropriate chapter numbers. So the first test is the customer. So, do you have the right customer? The second one is the pain, that's chapter 2A, or gain, chapter 2B. The third one is the value compared to the best current alternatives, because whatever it is, it's being satisfied by something today. So how is your thing better than the current thing that they're using? That's 3, the value test. 4 is the validation test. This is where you build an MVP, a minimum viable product, following Eric Ries's the lean startup methodology. You build some kind of a minimum viable product to test some assumptions. So now we come up with a solution, and we're testing it. By the way, one of the biggest issues that we have is that we actually start with the idea, and when we start with the idea, we're already biased. But we'll talk about that next week. So the 4th test is the validation test. Let's validate how our idea solves the pain or provides the gain. The 5th test is, can we keep a sustainable competitive advantage? And the 6th one is this a profitable business model? Can we be profitable or have a business model that ensures profitability? Well, this is the end of this episode. I kind of covered the introduction chapters. There's obviously a lot more in it. Remember that this book is a 400-page book with an 80-page workbook. And this is actually your real test, and this is your mindset. Do you want to fall in love with an idea, or do you want to evaluate it enough to not even spend the little time and money and effort that you need to build a prototype and throw it at the wall and let's see if it sticks? Because the worst thing that can happen is that you would get an initial sense that it does stick, that there is an initial success, and maybe the initial success is because the people who are buying it are your friends or family members or the early adopters, but that does not indicate that you're going to be successful in the market. Now, we talked about the myth of the visionary founder, the danger of being emotionally attached to your product. And I talked about why this happened and how the pendulum has swung from analysis paralysis to just a blind execution. Let's just throw things. You heard why I created this book and this podcast, and it's really to make you make smarter decisions, by not wasting time, not wasting your life on ideas that should have been killed early. The next episode will not actually cover chapter 1, the customer test, but chapter 0. So yes, I do have a chapter 0. Now ask, why do you have a chapter 0? That was an advice from ChatGPT, because we have 6 tests. 1, 2, 2A, 2B, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And ChatGPT suggested, and made a lot of sense, that we call the chapters by the test number. So chapter 1 for test 1, the customer, chapter 2A for test 2A, the pain, 2B, the gain, and so on and so forth. But I needed to have a chapter that gives you the overall framework. And ChatGPT just suggested, why don't you call it chapter 0? And I thought, well, that's unique, but why not? There's nothing prevents me. So next week, I will cover chapter 0. And I'll give you the overall framework of this entire process. Before we test Before we go into the 6 tests, I need you to understand what is the overall framework. How do they all work together? There are 3 circles there that I want you to understand of different things that you do. So I would encourage you to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss the next episode. If you or somebody you know is working on their next big thing, send this to them. Send this chapter to them or this episode. Look, falling in love with your idea is easy. Killing it when you should, that's the hard part. That's why I'm here. That's why this book is here. This is why this podcast is here. Because the world doesn't care how much you love your idea. It only cares whether it works for them. One final reminder, I record a new episode every other week, and that is because I'm balancing between 2 podcasts. The other one is The Trust Show that focuses on trust and trust premium. So next episode on this podcast is coming in 2 weeks. I'll see you then. So before you waste another dollar, another hour, another ounce of your passion, ask yourself, is it really a great idea? What do you want to know about evaluating ideas, testing them, and figuring out if they're worth building? I'd love to hear from you. Email me at yoram@isitreallyaGreatIdea.com. If you found this episode helpful, subscribe, rate the show, and leave a review. That's how others find it, and how more bad ideas die before they waste your time. For books, workbooks, keynotes, and tools to help you validate your next big idea, visit isitreallyaGreatIdea.com. Remember, falling in love with your idea is easy. Killing it when you should, that's the hard part. Thanks for listening to Is It Really a Great Idea?